So, hey guys, today we're going to do a bit of a little thesis or theory on why potentially Maxx C could be a bad card. And I'm not saying necessarily it's a bad card in design or anything. I'm saying specifically that Maxx C is a bad card and just purely a horrible card to be putting in your deck in the sense that it's inefficient and that it's bad. Not to say 100% that that's the case right now, because I don't have necessarily, well, I haven't done all the math to back that up as of currently, but I mean, after doing some math, I'm leaning towards Maxx C being not that great, like not super insane or anything, and it's being a bit overplayed, kind of, right? But what I'm saying straight up is the same idea as one I've kind of said before, where Pot of Greed is power crept, and eventually it'll only, well, if we keep going, right, it'll only get more power crept to the point where Pot of Greed, unironically, will be a bad card. So if we consider going first and going second, if we have cards that start doing like 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 things even on just like one piece of cardboard, like we're talking Sheeran, like we look at Sheeran just by itself. How many effects does Sheeran unironically have? During your main phase, you can special summon this card from your hand. If you do, send one monster from your hand to the graveyard. So the weird part about this card, I have no idea why it says during your main phase. Oh, when else would you be able to do an ignition effect? But anyways, send the top 3 cards of your deck to the graveyard. So already this is like 2 different effects. There are monsters that just pretty much purely just special summon themselves and do not much more, right? So we already have special summon yourself, and then we have mill 3. And of course there is a light warrant that pretty much only just does mill 3 or something like that, I believe, right? So there are even cards that only mill 1, cards that mill 2, whatever, right? Sheeran straight up mills 3, and then has this graveyard fusion effect. But it's a little bit better than some other ones because it shuffles back. But that's not super relevant, but essentially we have special summon yourself, mill 3, and we have fusion summon, which is essentially what might as well be 3 different effects, but they function as specifically 2 different effects. But if we look into it more, there are monsters with actually more effects than just what Sheeran has. And with one of these things we could look at, I guess, is technically Endymion, but Endymion's effects might not be like super relevant all the time. But we'll break down all the different effects. So the first thing on Endymion is the pendulum effect, which is very simply I special summon myself and then I pop 6 cards or something. Cool. And then this effect, we have a spell trap negate, and then we have the protection effect on Endymion, and then we have the if this card is destroyed by battle, you can add 1 normal spell from your deck to your hand. So this is still only going to be about 4 effects realistically, right? It's actually not that bad, and we can still do much worse from here. I don't remember exactly what it was, but there was something that had more effects than this. But yeah, I guess it doesn't really matter, right? So if we have cards that have even more effects than this, it's going to go to the point where if at this point forward we don't get any new hand traps are actually going to be power crept to the point where pretty much every hand trap could be just technically just bad or awful. And I mean, right now it kind of feels that way to like some extent. With, for example, if we have a Snake Eyes deck, we have original Sinful Spoils, and this is like a pretty nasty card, honestly. So let's see, original Sinful Spoils. So if we were to activate this, it's not really going to go that negative depending on how it goes exactly. But maybe we start with, I don't know, a wanted seeker of sinful spoils. That doesn't really matter, but all right. We activate original sinful spoils. We ash this. Next turn, original sinful spoils can just search again. So then it's essentially just full combo part 2, which I think personally kind of dumb. And there are other decks that can unironically tank Ash Blossom Joyous Spring with 1-card starters. So we have like Mathematics Circular, super heavy Samurai Soul Piercer, original Sinful Spoil Snake Eyes, and then you have other starters and extenders that are both starters and extenders that can just be activated without your normal summon, or you could just use your normal summon at this point, because original Sinful Spoils didn't use your normal summon necessarily. So that is pretty gross, I would say. And that's just Ash Blossom that's just Ash Blossom Joyous Spring being power crept. But what that means is that if we keep going in this kind of direction, then it would be possible, in theory at least, not saying it is going to happen necessarily, but if this keeps happening, and like just in general, all of the generic hand traps we have now are going to just fall off a cliff, then Maxx C actually loses a lot of value. And eventually it could get to the point where Maxx C is unironically going to be a bad card, because Maxx C is going to be seen as too slow. As wild as that sounds, Maxx C could be just too slow. So the idea would be, imagine an archetype that just goes insanely fast, and there's a key card that you need to stop like really fast. And whatever this card is, if you don't stop it fast enough, it'll be too late if you attempt to stop it mid-combo, because at that point, after it's that effect has resolved, you're maybe done for. So in this case, right now, an example of this might be with Blackwing. So let's say I resolve Simoon, banishing any Blackwing. I can then grab Black Whirlwind and specifically place Black Whirlwind from the deck face up to the Spell and Trap zone. And then this allows me to add Sudri, normal summon Sudri. So at this point, Maxx C has done literally nothing against this deck, right? So now we do Blackwing Sudri adds Shamal, and then we do add Vata. And at this point, unironically, unless you get Nibiru off of the Maxx C really fast, or at all, there are no hand traps that will likely stop Blackwing just straight up from comboing. It takes something like 3 hand traps probably to stop Blackwing at this point. Like, no joke, if we're talking about specifically generics, like if you were to DD Crow, go Spell, none of that actually stops Blackwing at this point in time, as wild as that may seem. So that's one possible idea of how this would work, right? But if you had specifically Ghost Ogre to begin with, you could immediately, on the first search of Black Whirlwind here, you can pop Black Whirlwind before I can add Sudri, and then the whole combo is dead, right? So at this point, you might be needing to run like more specific hate for certain decks. But I mean, even without like having a billion different effects, if decks are inherently more designed to take on, I guess, generic hand traps, like for example, Ash Blossom and Maxx C together is a very common combination that you can expect to see in most decks, right? If we actually take a look at, for example, Centurion, if we look at, well, specifically just those 2 hand traps, they're actually very inefficient or ineffective against Centurion to begin with. So if I open a 2-card hand, immediately Ash Blossom Joyous Spring does nothing, right? But even if I open the 1 card, depending on exactly what I open, the Ash Blossom Joyous Spring is not going to completely kill all my plays. So if I open Trudea, I can do normal summon Trudea, put Trudea in the back row, grab Primera, and then at this point, if you Ash the Primera, I still have next turn activate Trudea. So we have that. And then against Maxx C, in this case, if we swap Ash Blossom for Maxx C, then the play is that I can just grab Stand Up Centurion. I can, if I'm feeling it, I can discard a card, or not discard a card. It's actually specifically send a card from the hand to the graveyard. Well, if you care about that. And then we can place a guy in the back row if we're feeling it. If not, we can just keep what we currently have. And then next turn, we can just make Legadia, and you essentially upstart and you go completely even on Maxx C, just drawing once. So then we also draw once off of Legadia, and then we probably have some hand traps as well at this point in time. So that's kind of how it could potentially go. And if we go to the absolute extremes, there's also like some other issues with the engine. Like if there's a ridiculously cracked combo deck that's broken beyond all belief, like indescribably stupid. Like we're talking purely theoreticals now, like beyond theoreticals. So if we look at, for example, with the example of Tearlament is just like, what the hell is this garbage? That explains how I feel, right? So first off, Maxx C, unironically, Maxx C wasn't even that good against Tearlament because there was an easy anti Maxx C line you could do. So on Kick Kalos, if you immediately Maxx C'd, I can just add Celiac, set Celiac, pass. Celiac will then send Kick Kalos on your turn instead, and I will essentially play on your turn. So great. That's disgusting. And of course, getting into Kick Kalos and Celiac was a one-card combo as well, so hand traps to deal with and whatnot. And you only upstarted with your Maxx C. So that's wild. Practically, at the time of Tearlament being full power in Master Duel, essentially, or their peak, well, yeah. At that point in time, the only hand trap that unironically stopped Tearlament was Shifter, and that was it. There wasn't much else you could do unless you spam hand traps that trade off for entirely your opponent's like entire hand, I guess, right? So that'd be like I Crow, Havness in Graveyard. I'm going to Ash, Rhino Heart, and then I'll Imperm the Kick Kalos and all of that, right? The other generic that was kind of good was like Evenly, because if you were to Raigeki, everything just triggers or summons back, so that was no bueno. And same with like a Duster. If you were to Duster the back row, they're unironically plussing you. You're plussing your opponent by like dustering their back row, which is absurd. And of course, the famous tier 0 turn 0 play, where you can do a bunch of different things. We can use Havness in hand. We can use Herald of Orange Light to send a Miller from our hand to the graveyard. And of course, those Millers, one of them functioned as a hand trap situationally. So yeah, all of these different scenarios, that this is just what Tearlament did, I guess, right? So what if we get a deck that's unironically even more heinous than this? Then honestly, Maxx C could be just completely useless, even to the point where like we could consider Tearlament tame in comparison to this deck that has not yet been made, I guess, right? So let's assume in this case that this deck can combines some aspects of Tearlament and why they're broken, but it's even more resistant to hand traps than Tearlament. Because Tearlament, to an extent, it was just the fact that they had a lot of starters / extenders that kind of just worked together, right? So what if instead of that, we had something far more heinous? So we're talking like, uh, if we have, for example, Maxx Circular or Soul Piercer, and we take aspects of that and combine it with Tearlament, like just conceptually, right? So now we're able to, off of something like a Rhino Heart, it would take the equivalent of 2 Ash Blossoms to stop the 1-card combo. So you're not able to trade off hand traps fast enough to like stop them, and it would take more than your whole hand if they had 3 engine pieces, making it practically impossible to stop unless you have the exact hand trap necessary. So it would get to the point where, unironically, if we were to then go ahead and build like, let's say, a 40 card just fully hand trap deck, and this is not to say like we're going to win with a hand trap only deck, because there's no real win con here. I'm saying like, if you unironically were playing 40 generic like kind of hand traps like Maxx C, double Charmies and whatnot, and you were to be going second, this deck could be so brutal and so disgustingly broken that with all of these hand traps, you would unironically be unable to stop their combo in any like shape or form. They just end on essentially like 5 monsters on field, and then like 3-4 different interactions with the graveyard, maybe 2 or 3 interactions in the hand and back row, unironically. And maybe their monsters on field also have floating effects for whatever reason, or maybe something else, and they have like a billion different interactions and negates. Well, maybe a billion's a stretch, but like more than the cards in your hand anyways. And perhaps maybe they even have a floodgate, because, you know, unironically, Tearlament did technically play floodgate. We have your boy Abyss Dweller, which is quite all intensive purposes a floodgate. It's like a very niche specific thing it's floodgating, but a floodgate nonetheless. So it's not necessarily happening right now. It's not necessarily going to happen, but it would not be technically impossible for this kind of situation to just kind of come up eventually, unless, I don't know, maybe Konami designs around this, or maybe this could be their goal at this point, because at the current time, I think hand traps are just generally worse than the engines we have now, and I don't think engines are being developed in the same way as engine. So I think hand traps are genuinely just not at the same level as engine is right now. I mean, I'm not sure if that's 100% a good thing. I mean, right now I don't feel like it's a great thing, because, you know, we kind of have to run Ash Blossom Drifting, and it's just not really getting the value it should be getting when we're going second, I feel. Unless, I don't know, maybe we're playing against Labyrinth, in which case it sometimes also doesn't feel like it gets value, honestly. If you were to have transaction rollback in hand, there's nothing to realistically Ash in this situation, so yeah, that sucks, I guess. But yeah, that's all I got for you guys today, and I'll see you guys in the next video. And hopefully, yeah, the game never comes to this point, because that seems a little bit wild, but I guess if we have specifically more targeted hand traps that are super specific, like, I don't know, maybe they essentially read something like, banish if your opponent activates Tearlament Rhinoheart, banish the card that it sends, and also banish all copies of Kick Kalos from your opponent's extra deck. We would essentially need the equivalent of that, like targeted specifically to whatever deck, I guess, is obscenely broken. I guess we can call it the new Tearlament, I guess. So yeah, that's all I got for you guys today, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.